On December 9th, 2022, Square Enix released Dragon Quest Treasures, a spin-off game based on characters from the most popular Dragon Quest game, Dragon Quest XI, particularly on the party member Eric. So, from that premise alone, one would assume there would be some interest in the game based on those factors. Unfortunately, not that many people knew about the game, and Square Enix declared that the game did not meet sales expectations. So, what went wrong? Why did the game flop? Well, there's many factors behind it, but I believe to have 4 reasons to why this game flopped. And before we begin, I just want to make the statement clear, as I've made already in past videos. I believe Dragon Quest Treasures was a fine game. I thought the gameplay loop was fine, but ultimately, when you look at the game critically, there are some issues with the game, and this game was not going to be as successful as Square Enix hoped. So, let's dive right in. Number 1. Bad graphics. This was something I talked about anytime I had the chance to talk about the game. The fact is, the game does not look appealing at all on the console it released on, being the Nintendo Switch. Flat textures, low poly environments, subpar lighting were just things I noticed when playing the game. It just does not look good at all. It looks like a high-res 3DS game. And I know there will be immediately people out there that will come to the defense of this game and argue things that games like Pokemon sold very well and the games don't look graphically appealing on those games. And that's where I stop you right there and come with my first counterpoint. The fact is, when it comes down to something like Pokemon and Dragon Quest, they're completely different things to talk about. Pokemon is a worldwide sensation. It's a popular franchise worldwide, everyone knows what Pokemon is. So of course you're going to have a lot of people that will go in and buy a game like Pokemon regardless of how the games look. While you have Dragon Quest on the other hand, it's only really popular in Japan, and very niche elsewhere. And to drive this point very clear, you have a game like Dragon Quest XI, which is the most popular Dragon Quest game currently, and that game only managed to sell 2 million units outside of Japan. So when you have a spin-off game that does not look graphically pleasing, yeah, that's going to hurt the franchise right there. That's going to hurt the impression of the game itself. Especially when you consider the fact that this is coming from Square Enix, a company that's well known of producing high-end visuals for their games. So when you have a game that looks very low poly, yeah, that's going to be an issue right there. Because at the end of the day, we play with our eyes. Games are a visual kind of media. So when you look at something that doesn't look appealing, yeah, that's going to be a problem right there. And at the end of the day, I said this in my first Dragon Quest Treasures video. They should have spent time to work on the graphics and make it more pleasing to the eye. But they didn't, and it hurt the game's reputation at the end of the day. Number 2. Unfocused gameplay and progression. And before we go into this, I want to mention that, like I said, I thought the gameplay was fine. I thought the gameplay loop was fine, and I thought the combat was fine. But then again, I'm kind of the person who plays games like Banjo-Kazooie and a bunch of other collectathon games where those combats are relatively simplistic. So of course I would be into something like Dragon Quest Treasures. But when you look at it critically, you can see that there's a lot of issues with the gameplay that may not interest that many people. First off, I want to mention that at the beginning of the game, there's a full hour of the game that's completely boring, and already that can be something of a turnoff for many people who played that first hour. They're like, man, this is boring here. I don't want to play this. Yeah, that's a major turnoff right there. And secondly, when you look at the combat, the game's very button mashy. You just press a button all the time. Sure, there's some dodge rolls and there's some things you can do to help win the battles and what have you, but for the most part, you're just tapping the button. And that's where the gameplay loop, while there is a main story where you go from point A to point B, it's mostly just wander around these condensed open worlds finding treasure, and it's all RNG based on what you get. And the intrinsic value of these treasures are highly based on the fact that you are a Dragon Quest fan and you know these references that they're trying to get at you. And already you're limiting the audience from that alone. Dragon Quest is a very niche franchise, and not that many people have played the past Dragon Quest games. As we know already, Dragon Quest XI is the one that most people have played. So of course, when you have a game that's highly based on nostalgia, and you're essentially trying to appeal this to people who've never played the past games, that's going to be a problem right there. People are not going to get the gameplay loop because they're not into these characters, or these worlds, or these items that they get. What I'm trying to get at is that the developers have limited the audience who will be into something like Dragon Quest Treasures. And they should have went out their way to find a way to make Dragon Quest Treasures more appealing to more people. And I think I have the answer. Number 1, rework the combat. Not something like DMC, more intense like that. More something like Sonic Frontiers, where even though the combat in Sonic Frontiers is more simplistic, you can still do some things here and there, and it's definitely more of a spectacle in comparison to Dragon Quest Treasures. Number 2, rework the intro section. It's way too boring. You have to rework it to where it's more engaging to go through the tutorial itself. And I would have reworked the gameplay loop where you had 100 treasure instead of all these treasures to go out and collect. and make it more like a collectathon game where you essentially go out your way and find these unique locations to find treasure. Give the treasure a value to go out and collect. And that's what I would have done, but at the end of the day, the gameplay is what it is, and it definitely didn't appeal to as many people as possible. Number 3. The release date. Yeah, Square Enix really screwed themselves here. 2022 for the holiday season was definitely a very competitive year for a multitude of reasons. God of War Ragnarok came out that season, Sonic Frontiers came out, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet all came out during the holiday season, and definitely, from Square Enix's perspective, they released way too many games during the holiday season as well. Crisis Core Reunion, Romancing Saga, Valkyria Elysium, Cactus Ogre Reborn, and Harvest Stella were just a handful of titles that came out during the holiday season from Square Enix. So essentially, not only do you have to compete against some of the biggest games of the year like Pokemon, God of War, and Sonic, you also have to compete against the games that Square Enix released that year, essentially cannibalizing into sales of Dragon Quest Treasures and many other titles, because they also mentioned those titles also didn't meet sales expectations. And it's definitely very baffling because when you look at Square Enix's 2022 release lineup, they didn't really release that many games during the summer. They only released the Live Alive remake. Why couldn't they release some games during the summer, spread out these releases, so none of these games will have a chance in cannibalizing to each other's sales? Because let's not forget, many of these games I just mentioned have some form of RPG mechanic in them, essentially meaning they're a part of the same genre, and of course that's going to be more of a reason to cannibalize into each other's sales. Ultimately, this was a very bad play on Square Enix's part to release all these games during the holiday season, and really bad marketing choices. And speaking of marketing, Number 4. Poor marketing. Out of all the reasons I've mentioned to why Dragon Quest Treasures flopped, if there's one thing I can point to, this would be it. The marketing for Dragon Quest Treasures was bad. I can't believe Square Enix missed the one thing that could get people to notice the game. Even someone with $0 in marketing could market this game better. Though to be fair, it's not all too bad. The choices of showing off the game in the 35th anniversary and the Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase was definitely all great choices overall. But afterwards, what the hell happened? Why just drop a trailer during Tokyo Game Show? This is Dragon Quest we're talking about. This should be bigger. Actually show it off. And number 2, why weren't there any times you can go out and get a hands-on with this game, get a good feeling about the game before their game releases? And number 3, because I know this for a fact because I work as a content creator, not that many people who are content creators got early copies of the game. I know there are some people who had some early copies of the game and had hands-on with the game early, but from what I can tell, it was far too little content creators who had hands-on with the game, and on top of that, some of the channels did not have the reach to help push sales for this game. And to top it all off, Square Enix thought that releasing a demo a month after the game released was a better idea to try to get more sales into the game. That's not going to bring in sales. Something like that would be better if you released the demo a month early, like you did with Dragon Quest XI, not a month after. Who thought this was a good idea right there? Who was the Neanderthal that thought about that? We can all agree that these choices were definitely very bad choices for Square Enix to market the game. As you can see, there were a ton of reasons and factors to why Dragon Quest Treasures flopped. And before I give my final thoughts, I want to give the mic to some content creators to give their perspective on the game, what they think about the game itself, and ultimately why they thought it flopped. So, here we go.
Hey everyone, Ryan from BattleGeek Plus here. I found Dragon Quest Treasures to be an enjoyable and an addictive game because I was really obsessed with finding all the treasures, and I am a bit baffled on why it didn't sell that well, probably because it wasn't a traditional turn-based Dragon Quest, or that Dragon Quest's presence in the United States is still low. I mean, who knows, but I do highly recommend the game, and it usually goes on sale for pretty cheap, so definitely check it out.
In my own personal opinion, Dragon Quest Treasures looks like a pretty fun time. It doesn't really look like a game that would personally stick for me, and my only Dragon Quest experience is through Dragon Quest XI, and I've played about probably a little over half of the game. And I see that it has Eric from Dragon Quest XI and his sister, but I'm not entirely sure who this game is for, as I feel like it could be a lot more interesting, I guess. And the gameplay is very different from Dragon Quest, obviously being some kind of adventure action game, and because of that, as fun as it looks, I don't really see Dragon Quest fans, I guess from the outside perspective, even wanting to buy this game because it's very different from traditional Dragon Quest, and for me personally as well.
Dragon Quest Treasures is a boring slog of a game and an embarrassment to the franchise's legacy. The combat sucks, the graphics are horrendous, it looks like a mobile game, and it just has a very shallow gameplay mechanics with these boring worlds to explore and repetitive treasure hunting mechanics that don't really spark your sense of adventure like the series is known for. The game was poorly marketed, its gameplay doesn't appeal to longtime Dragon Quest fans, and yet it's so reliant on cameos and Easter eggs from the franchise's history that it doesn't appeal to non-Dragon Quest fans either. The game was so bad I couldn't even finish it, and I can only guess that many other people felt the same way.
And there you have it. Regardless of what you think about Dragon Quest Treasures, it's not surprising that the game failed like it did. From the poor graphics, bland gameplay, the release date, and terrible marketing, all of these contributed to the failure of the game. And like I said, I thought the game was fine. I thought there were some good merits to the game, but they needed to do more to appeal this game to more people, which they didn't. But I would like to hear from you guys here. Do you agree with my reasonings, or do you have your own reasonings to why Dragon Quest Treasures flopped? I'd like to hear them in the comments down below. Plus, don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe as well. And you want to see more Dragon Quest videos, check out these videos here. See you guys on the next one. Take care.